Do you know that any past has its own past? Anyone philosophizes these days. When you did something in the past, this thing has another action before it that you had done. This action lies in the past perfect. That's why the past perfect tense, which is today's lesson, is also known as the second past. It's also famous for confusing every English learner, and let's hope it ends today. But it will not be happening unless you bring the paper and pen. Let's get started. Before we start, let's first discuss why it's called the past perfect. Why it's called perfect. The word perfect came from the Latin word perfectum, which is finished or completed. The earliest English grammarians were struggling to describe the grammar because they had no tool, only the classical grammar. And they called the past perfect the second past, because they already considered the past simple the first past tense. We use the past perfect tense to express two actions that happened in the past, one of them preceding the other, or happened before the other. The one happened first is past perfect. The second one is past simple. Remember, the past perfect cannot stand alone. It needs another sentence in the past simple or another phrase. We will discuss all of them today. And that's by logic. It will not be perfected then. It also makes a perfect scenery to what you narrate. Imagine in the morning you woke up, opened the room door, hear the strange voice coming from outside. You looked from the window. You saw a big vehicle had parked in front of your home. How will you narrate this to your friend? I turned back to the window after I had heard a strange voice, and I saw that a vehicle had parked in front of our home. This is how it works. You make a perfect scenery to what happened in the past by organizing the actions. What comes first is the past perfect, and the other actions in the past simple. So the past perfect main form is subject plus the third form of the verb have, which is had, plus the main verb also in the third form or the past participle. We know that every word has three forms. The first form is the present one. For example, the verb see. This is the first form. In the past, it's saw, the second form of the verb, or the past form of the verb. And the third form, which is the past participle, seen. And it's seen because the verb see is an irregular verb. And of course, we have regular verb like want, wanted, wanted. We only add ed. We don't change the form of the verb. Let's dig deep in the past perfect. First, I had woken up, and then I opened my eyes. See, the past perfect comes the first one, but we can make it the second one. It's not necessarily to become the first one. I opened my eyes after I had woken up.
Destroyed the biosphere of the planet after he had taken the sample.
First, he had taken the example, and then he destroyed the atmosphere or the biosphere.
But when I got off stage, someone had eaten all of them.
First, someone had eaten all of them. See, it's in the past perfect because this is the first thing to happen. And then he got on the stage and found out the problem.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, I fell into this vat of glop those weird guys had made.
Also in this one, what was the first thing to happen? The weird guys had made the valve globe. And then he fell into it. Now let's take a look on how to make it negative As usual, we only add not after the auxiliary or the helping verb, which was the third form of the verb to have. Subject plus had plus not.
I hadn't worked in, well, quite a while, so I was stressed. Well, not really, considering he hadn't worked there in years.
We also have the question form. We swap or replace, as usual, the auxiliary verb with the subject. I had watched. Had I watched? As for the WH question, we add the WH word before the yes no question. Had I watched? What had I watched?
Had you spoken to Dominic before today?
No.
Now the main important part, how it's commonly used and what are the most used words that come with a past perfect. First, the adverb already. We use adverb already a lot in the past perfect.
I walked out a cancer patient. Ovarian.
I'm sorry.
Had already spread to the liver and the lungs.
And the adverb when.
Long story short, she left a sort of last testament with her sister. Wrote that when she arrived on the scene, Detective Malevsky had killed the two dealers.
I had been. Of course, you see this a lot. Let's take a look on what does it mean.
But neighbors now say some of the boys had been bad for a while.
Character. They escaped the zoo by killing their trainer, a trainer who had been with them for years since they were cubs.
Please be noted that this been is a third form or the past participle of the verb to be, which, if you remember in the past simple, the past form of the verb to be is was, yet and since.
He published that book 5 years ago. How do you confess to something he hadn't done yet?
Character. They escaped the zoo by killing their trainer, a trainer who had been with them for years since they were cubs.
Never and for.
Your grandfather. He stitched your name in here. Yet never stitched a thing in his life.
A father, a mother, 2 daughters had lived in the house only for a brief time before they suddenly vacated.
We need to remember the difference between for and since. We use for with the full period, like for 5 years. Those 5 years have a beginning and an end. Whereas since, we mention it before a certain time, like since 1944, since my last birthday. And we use a past perfect with after and before.
Ah, yes, Abdullah. And you saw no other person enter this courtyard?
After Mrs. Leitner had gone into a room? No. My dad got remarried a couple years ago after he and my mother had just gotten divorced.
Did you go to the wedding?
Wasn't invited. Nice, huh?
He destroyed the biosphere of the planet after he had taken the sample.
And the word ever.
Had you ever met?
No.
We also need to know the difference between had been and gone. Had been means that he went to a place and returned. Whereas gone means that he went to a place but never returned or hasn't returned yet.
We'd gone out before, a few years ago.
Ah, yes, Abdullah. And you saw no other person enter this courtyard?
After Mrs. Leitner had gone into a room? No.
When we were in the other room, you said you had been there before. What did you mean by that?
And of course, the famous phrase had. The first had is the past participle of the verb to have, the auxiliary verb, And the second head is the past participle of the verb to have or to possess, to own something, to have something.
With whom Hendrix had a lot of contact.
Jamie's sister Jenny and her husband Ian had another baby while we were in Paris.
We can also use the stative verbs.
Sure wish we'd have made it back to Gaffia, though, for Katie's sake.
Me too. Here, I thought I had made real inroads with you guys. You thought wrong.
I know it doesn't help now, but I realize I made a mistake.
I assume she made some other arrangement.
We can say I'd instead of I had. We can say he'd instead of he had. We can say you'd instead of you had. We can say they had and we can say they'd. We can say we'd and we can say we had.
Because I'd eaten the brain of a woman who did that sort of thing every night, indiscriminately.
He'd eaten something you prepared for Mary.
But not that way.
You could have lost everything you'd worked for because of Abby.
He knew exactly why she was in town. He just didn't know everything she'd done.
People finally started to pay attention to what they'd done to us.
We'd gone out before, a few years ago.
You can also find brief explanation on the contractions in the link above. And this is everything you need to know about the past perfect. If I forgot anything, please mention it in the comments. It will be very appreciated. Hope you guys enjoyed watching the video and see you, or actually you see me in the next video. Goodbye.